All right. So I am joined today by Tasha Louie. Tasha, you do things that don't look like they should be possible. I'm talking spinning barbells like they're batons, folding yourself in half with the barbell on your back, hanging onto pull-up bars with one hand and flipping plates in the other hand and catching them. I mean, it's really incredible stuff. And it's things that I never would have thought to try doing in the gym myself. And I know a lot of athletes. I treat athletes. I have friends that do jujitsu or gymnastics or climbing, and they're strong, athletic people. And I know they can do a lot of the things you do. So it's really amazing to watch. And I'm just curious, how did you pick this path? How did you start exploring these different movements?
I think it started with childhood. I was never really good at drawing within the lines or like coloring within the lines, or sticking to all the rules in one sport. It was always like I liked this aspect of this and I liked this aspect of that. I'm going to try to blend the two together because it seemed really fun to me. That's kind of always been my thing. And um, of course, there are like getting good at the basics of certain things are really, really handy and really good. But I think I I think I can speak for everyone when I say that exercise itself can get boring. It can get very monotonous and it can get tiresome. So finding ways that interest you, tweaking it just a little bit for the sake of novelty, to learn something new, how to apply it in a different context, I think keeps things really fresh and teaches you how to do things better in a not always optimum way, but at least an entertaining and um, thoughtful way.
Cool. Yeah, it shows that it's thoughtful and that it's creative. It's really reflecting in just how you move. It's not it just doesn't look like someone really taught you how to do these sorts of things. It looks like you're exploring as you're doing them, and it's really cool to see. When people start exercising, and they follow this typical, sometimes boring route, as you said, it's almost like a rite of passage where you're just bombarded with these fitness myths where there's only one right way to do things, and you shouldn't bend your back if you're holding a barbell, and you have to hold your breath when you do this, and put your knees in this sort of alignment. So these myths are everywhere. Were you Did you ever encounter them, and did you ever believe them?
Absolutely, 100%.
Mm,
Uh, I started in the gym rather late. No, I tried out the gym in my teens, and then I was discouraged. I revisited it more than a decade later. I started in my early 30s, and yeah, it's a confusing place. I mean,
mm,
everybody's doing something, and everybody's got something to say,
yeah,
but sometimes the advice doesn't feel right to you for whatever reason. It feels dangerous, or you're completely new. Everything feels weird. So I think that um, falling back on certain rules, and I put this in air quotes, um, feels safer for a lot of people. And I believed them for a very long time until I started deciding maybe I should just stray from the line a little bit and see
mm,
how it feels. Does it feel safe? Can I make it feel safe for myself? And once I discovered that you can do certain things based on what you know about yourself, it becomes a lot more empowering. And you get to think a little bit more critically on your own how to move your body.
right. I I did not have the same, I guess, bravery as you to go outside of these lines, because when I started being a little more okay to break these, again, air quotes, rules,
Mhm.
it was a lot because of the influence of people in the physio space that promote this idea of movement optimism, and that there's more than one right way to do things and that your body can adapt. And that's the only reason I started to feel a little bit okay with bending my spine a bit under load, or doing things that are a little bit out of the norm. So it's cool that you sort of went back to those childhood roots where you're like, you just didn't want to stay in a box that someone made for you, and that you just wanted to explore a little bit more. It's really cool because it shows that you don't really follow many rules.
Well, I mean, here's the other thing though too. I think that as kids, we were never told how we should move as
Yeah.
well. We just kind of messed around on our own. Like, if you look at kids play, they're bending their spines all around, folding themselves in half, and they're completely fine. They may take a tumble, eat a bit of shit, and get back up, and they're okay.
Yeah.
And you learn and you move on. I think that's an aspect that a lot of us don't consciously retain and practice as we get into our teen years and our adult years. And that feeling goes away. Therefore, we make up these rules to keep us safe. Air quotes again.
Right. Yeah. We suddenly are way more fearful of eating shit.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to get injured, right? But it's a lot of the times injury is something that we could recover from fairly well. Almost like in most instances when we get hurt, as long as it's not something that's, life changing, we can make almost a full recovery. And I think having an understanding that your body can adapt and be resilient and recover, I think it gives you a little more reason to explore a bit more and to be okay with maybe getting a bit hurt. That being said, we obviously don't want to promote, people doing whatever they want in the gym, because I know if I tried to do some of the stuff you do later on today, I would get hurt. So that being said, do you have any advice for someone that maybe sees you on Instagram, sees all of these really cool things that you do? Uh, how would you advise them to start that journey of moving in that way?
I'd say definitely, I mean, full disclaimer here. And because social media is what it is, a lot of what I post and what most people post is a very, very small sliver
Mm,
of their life, of their practice, of their routine, whatever it may be. Um, so these are things that I've built up to over the course of hours, weeks, maybe even months. Um, and that's, what I show is the final result, so to speak. I will expand upon it later, but it's something that did take some work, some thought, some research to look into. So if I'm spinning a barbell, it's because I started out with with a broomstick,
mm,
and then I would progress to a baby barbell or whatnot, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, so forth. Um, I would advise everyone to take those smaller steps because that's how everything tends to work. I think we um, can sometimes give a little bit too much credit to carryover, um, thinking that I'm talented in this area of exercise. I'll be completely fine in this, and I'll just jump right to it. And in some cases, it can be the case, but in a lot of cases, it's not. And that's something I learned a lot.
yeah,
So learning from my mistakes, it's like you have to be a little bit more conscious and a little bit more thoughtful about your approach to certain things. If you are not a naturally flexible person, then maybe not put a full barbell with weights on it and try to fold it in half. Start with a regular forward fold with no weight at all, or something much lighter,
right,
and see how it feels and adjust from there.
for sure. I want to go back to something you said. You said you started training like this, and you were reintroduced to the gym in your early 30s, right?
Mhm.
What were you doing physical activity before then? Were you doing gymnastics or anything like that?
No, I actually got kicked out of the gymnastics class that my mom put me in when I was because I couldn't sit still and just do what was expected of me.
Hmm.
Um, so I had maybe a month's worth of gymnastics experience when I was like five or six.
Okay.
But prior to the gym and working out, I did tennis in high school. Um, and after that, I did um, 6 months of yoga and a bit of rock climbing recreationally.
Okay.
And about it. But as a kid, I didn't just play around, ride my bike, climb trees. Um, yeah, that's about it.
That's incredible. That's really cool because I mean all
Mhm.
those things would help a little bit, right? Like recreational rock climbing, I can imagine would help with the flexibility, the climbing the trees, the tennis just with some athleticism. But uh, I mean, none of that really on its own doesn't explain how you do what you do. So when you first got into the gym,
Yeah.
what were your workouts looking like? Were you like were you doing all the same movements but with just lighter weight, or did you have to learn how to do these movements themselves?
I started with the very basics of bodybuilding, what everybody else was doing at the
Um,
time in the gym. So a lot of machine work. I discovered that I was pretty good at pressing, like bench pressing.
mhm.
So I just doubled down on the bench press until I got injured, and then I had to shift. But uh, yeah, a lot of machines at the time, just because I didn't understand how to stabilize my body in a basic back squat.
Yeah.
Um, and that's about it. For the first 2 years or so, it was just a lot of machines. Um, and then I discovered Instagram and started following a bunch of dancers and martial artists. And I'm like,
Mm,
that's really cool.
yeah.
Maybe I can do some of that. And my 6 months of yoga background helped with some things.
Hmm.
And looking at everybody else around me at the time, I realized that my hips were fairly mobile on their own. Now, whether that's genetics or because of how I was playing around in the yoga class or climbing, I don't know, but I doubled down on that. So it was a lot of basics, machines, doubling down on things that I realized were strengths of mine.
Wow. That's encouraging. It really is. It's one of those things where if you started doing all that stuff in the gym, it's almost like if you could do it, why couldn't someone else, right? There probably is a genetic component to it,
For
but
sure.
that's definitely not the only factor, right? Hard work is definitely something that you put into this.
I think that being interested in something and following that through in whatever way that you can, and having an imagination helps immensely,
Yeah.
because it wasn't like I spoke to a bunch of trainers or people around me on how to do certain things at the time. It was me obsessively watching video. Instagram was a big inspiration. A lot of old films of martial artists. I was
Mm.
never allowed to try martial arts because my parents didn't want me to beat up my brother any more than I. So, but it was, and dance was something that I was intrigued with my entire life, but I was never ballsy enough to try it
Mm,
because I'm scared of it.
yeah,
Um, so watching other people move and imagining how it felt for them to move in that way, I would try it over and over and over again until I felt a path that felt right to me and felt good.
very cool. Yeah, because the stuff you do, it's very creative, and you could see that your imagination is in it. But I could imagine that other people who maybe decided to pick a similar route as you, they could create their own sorts of movement patterns based off of what they were good at and doubling down on their own strengths, which is really cool because when it comes to bodybuilding, there's not tons of variability in how you can do things, right? It's not a very creative endeavor. But what's cool about what you do is that someone could watch what you do and just take bits and pieces of it and get inspired by it. They don't need to completely copy what you do because it would be immensely difficult. And they might have different strengths that they could tailor to, right?
For sure. I think everybody's got their own way of moving that is up to them to um, develop and explore and build upon. I think that we all have that ability, but we're not really aware of that, I guess, or we're
Mm,
not told that enough. Um, and it's, Yeah, I think it's a lot of times when it comes to movement optimism and that whole idea is to give ourselves and our bodies the chance to do things. Just like recovery, like we don't give ourselves enough time to let things heal. Um, and it's very capable of it. There isn't much you can do to speed things up besides letting uh, just time take its place.
Right. And then maybe also just trying to be healthy, right? Because if you do things that if you're sleeping 2 hours a night, and if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, and if you're extremely stressed out, these sorts of things might impede that healing process. So just doing your best to allow it to happen, right?
Absolutely. I actually just woke up from a nap, so that's probably, I apologize for my appearance if it seems a little off. Um, I I try to get as much sleep as possible. It helps immensely.
Yeah, everything's connected. Like bad habits can often lead to other bad habits, and good habits can lead to other good ones. It's sort of just about getting the momentum started, right? And just once it's going, it gets to a certain point where once you've been working out so consistently for years, it's almost harder to get the ball stopped than to keep it rolling, which I think is huge. And in the beginning, it could really be difficult. So I guess it's, as you were saying earlier about your training process, it's about taking those baby steps and just inch by inch getting the ball rolling, right?
For sure, for sure.
So we're talking about recovery a little bit and injury, and you recently had your own injury. What was it, 7 or 8 weeks ago at this point?
I'd say it's about yeah, 7 or 8 weeks ago.
Okay. Do you want to let us know sort of what the injury was and how it happened?
Sure. So wasn't training related. I was at a friend's place and she was showing us her home gym. I was like, oh, cool, let me check it out. And so I wasn't prepared to like do anything crazy. She had a pole installed in her garage, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I've never played with that before.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I had the ability to hold on to, what do you call those things at a playground where you slide down a pole? It's anyway. It,
Is it on like a track and
yeah,
it goes? Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I don't know what to call it, but I know what you're saying. Yeah.
So as a kid, after I'm done with that, I was able to like flip myself over it, um,
Okay.
my legs through it. I was like, oh, I can do this again. But it's been decades since I've done it,
Hmm.
and it's like it was at the end of dinner. I had lotion on my hands, something I never have when I go train, and so my grip strength was different, and I just went for it and completely lost my grip. I was completely upside down. I was maybe
Mm.
5 feet up from the cement floor that I fell on, head first,
Head
and
first?
head first, yeah, smacked my head pretty good first, and then on my neck, and everything just followed afterwards.
Oh,
Um, it was pretty bad.
yeah. Did you get knocked out?
I was not knocked out, but I was very sleepy uh, during the process, so that warranted more serious action.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I fractured my spinous process, the T1,
Hmm.
uh, which the ER doctor said was surprising. That it was the only thing that happened. No brain damage, no skull damage even,
Mm.
just huge bruising. No damage to the spinal cord or anywhere else, just the very, very tip of the spinous process.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it is kind of surprising based off of what happened. And although unfortunate, in a way, oddly enough, kind of lucky, right?
Yes.
So maybe the next day, I can imagine the head was pretty sore, but after a while, was the only really the pain that you were feeling related to that area, the T1 spinous process?
It was mostly from the grapefruit-sized bruise on my head that
Yeah.
really hurt. The spinous process itself didn't really provide much pain until a week or so later.
Hmm.
Um, but it was more the fear than anything that held me back, because you hear a spine fracture, it sounds really serious, and the follow-up doctor made it sound like it was pretty bad.
Mm,
Don't do anything. Be
mm,
very careful. Forget about working out. You'll probably be in too much pain to do it. So a big part of it was, figuring out what I could do. Um, and sure, my range of motion was a bit limited. Couldn't raise my arms above my shoulder. Putting on a jacket or reaching for the eggs at the top of the fridge was a little tough. But yeah,
you don't stay in between the lines. So the doctor said don't work out. And you're like, I'm gonna explore a little bit.
I I knew that being completely dormant, like if I were to stay bedridden, I think that would have been bad for me because I tore my ACL 2 years ago, 3 years ago now,
Mm,
and I learned a lot from that injury. And I didn't move at all, and I was very very half-assed about my rehab as well,
mm,
and there was so much atrophy around my leg. My right leg is still not caught up to my left leg in terms of muscle density and everything. So I knew that I had to keep moving and promote the healing process. And I knew that movement helps. You get
mm,
circulation into the area, you flush out whatever's stuck in there, and you bring in what nutrients it needs to recover. So started very, very simple with like assisted hanging. um, Push-ups on a countertop were too painful, so I did push-ups on the wall.
mm,
Um, just anything I could do to move it a bit. Nothing extreme, nothing hardcore. Gentle spinal waves or spinal segmentation um, daily, and I
mm.
think that helped quite a bit.
Wow. Okay. So when you were exercising, was any of it painful? So like when you were going off of the wall and you're doing your push-ups, for example, or the assisted hangs, how were you doing that? With just your feet supported or with a resistance band? Or...
No, with my feet supported.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you were doing those things, was there any pain, or were you trying to do things where there was no pain at all?
In the first week or so, I did things without pain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when people ask you about your pain tolerance and give me where it's at from a 1 to 10,
Yeah.
that changes all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I Especially during an injury. So that first week, everything felt possibly painful.
Mm.
And my body trying to protect itself. I know that.
Right.
uh, so the first week I was extremely conservative. Any hint of it, I reassessed what I could do to soften that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
The week afterwards, you know, depending on how I felt, somewhere around a 3, 4. Um, that's what I would kind of find the edge of pain and work
Yep.
around it.
Got it. Yeah, I think the way you did it is very admirable because when people injure their spine, it's just how we think about the spine in our culture. It's the scariest place to injure, I think. When people hear the word like disc herniation or spinal fracture, it's fear inducing, really bad, right? And I can't imagine how you must have felt originally, especially with the doctor telling you not to move, not to work out, and all those sorts of things. So how did you find that motivation? Was it just based off of the past when you hurt the ACL, or did you have? I know you worked with Oliver as well,
Mhm.
right?
Yes. So a lot of it was from previous injuries, and
Mm-hmm.
often just in the past recent years, doing more work with my spine and learning more about the spine. Um, things like loading the spine and curling it or bending it or flexing it in ways that are not recommended by most healthcare professionals and some PTs. Um, Something like the Jefferson curl, I had been very proficient at
Mm-hmm.
in the past couple of years. So I more or less knew what it could do, and I was, less fearful of it, of what I would have thought when I first started working out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it was just knowing what my spine could take and really really listening in on how it felt.
Yeah.
Yes, I worked with Oliver Crossley. And so he's a PT, great guy. He does a lot of work on pain science, and I took a course with him and John Yuen, I think it was a year or two ago. And based on what I knew about pain and the spine and all these things, I decided to test them out, right?
Yeah.
Very, very, very conservatively, but it was really cool to have something else to focus on versus don't move and
Mm.
don't move at all, don't make it worse, all that kind of stuff. I knew that if you didn't move, things around the injury will just deteriorate, the
Mm.
muscles, neck, all that kind of stuff. So I didn't want that as well. So yeah, it was a lot of. I mean, I guess my background in exploring helped a lot in this
Yeah.
recovery process a lot.
Because you're
And
sort of doing that again, right? It's just sort of regressed.
everything I realized is kind of the same. It's just on a very different scale.
Yeah.
Everything the details and the minute little things that you would change become so much finer, so much more. The scale is very different, and it's finding that scale.
Yeah, for sure. That's what physio is. It's
Yes,
all it is. It's basically like your training, but things are just regressed and the scale is a little bit different.
yes.
And then you just build back up to where you were before. So the past experience of training and from understanding the body and pain science was really, really helpful for you. And I think that's great for people to sort of understand. I think sometimes, and I'm not pulling from any exact research when I say this, but just from the little experience that I have so far, it seems that when people have a history of exercise and of dealing with injuries in a positive way, it can make the recovery from new injuries a little bit more manageable and could really help the prognosis.
I firmly believe that.
Hmm.
Um, and I know of people close to me who have never been injured in their life, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But what I've also seen is when they do get injured, because we we move around and accidents happen, right?
Yeah.
When they do get injured and it happens to be much later in life and they don't have that experience to fall back on to reflect upon, it's really hard to stay positive,
Mm.
especially when they're in their 80s or 90s. And
Mm.
I'm speaking of my grandmother right now. So she broke her hip, she had surgery, and she's 95 years old. She had never had any serious injury prior to that or any kind of exercise besides walking and doing her own gardening and cooking and cleaning, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But when she had that injury, um, she didn't know what rehab was. She didn't believe in it.
Hmm.
She pretty much thought, it's hopeless from here. So it's really hard if you don't have that experience beforehand to understand things about your body later on that you can apply.
For sure. Because learning that your body's adaptable and resilient is much harder when it's in a lot of pain, right?
Yes,
It's easy to say that when you're like progressing in the gym and you're learning all these cool things. But when you're doing a movement and it hurts, it's really hard to understand that it's not always that detrimental. Sometimes it is, but not always.
that's something that I realized and that I talk to my clients a lot about if they're completely new to working out. Um, I'm a trainer. I thought that might be good to put out there. I'm not just some person that does crazy things just for the sake of crazy things.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have difficulty discerning the difference between just a sensation in an unfamiliar body part and pain. Um, in some cultures, they don't have a word for soreness. And I'm speaking
Oh.
from my own. Like I train my parents, and they speak Cantonese, and I keep asking them, "Do you feel sore?" And they're like, "I don't know what that means." I'm like, "What are you feeling?" They're like, "It hurts." And it's interesting because they'll feel something in their lower back because of preconceived notions, and they'll think that something really hurts when all they're getting is actually a back pump.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or a muscle burn,
Right.
right? And people say, "Well, it hurts or it burns here." I'm like, does it feel like it's like really really alarming? Does it feel like this is something that's going to carry through and um, sustain itself
Yeah.
at that intensity? And they'll think about it for a couple of seconds, maybe a minute, and they'll be like, "No, it's gone."
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can expose myself to more and more and more of this. So
Right.
it's very graded, all these sensations that we feel in our bodies, and being able to figure out what it means
Yeah.
is quite important.
For sure. And our language doesn't always support that, as you said, which is really interesting. And I think just to highlight what you just said about the duration of those symptoms,
Mhm.
that's a key indicator. So for anybody listening to this and they don't know how to help someone learn that a certain sensation is okay, intensity and duration is a big factor. If it goes away after a minute, you can use that to sort of teach them that it's not like they damaged their body. Because if it was damaged, the pain would probably still be present, if
Mhm.
we do want to call it pain,
Right.
right? Yeah. So where are you at now, Tasha, with respect to your recovery?
I think so. In theory, it's supposed, the bone heals in 6 to 8 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Um, and the spine is just like any other bone, more or less. So in theory, it's supposed to be completely healed. Um, I think oh no.
I can hear you.
Oh, are we back?
Yeah, it's all good for me.
Okay. Your video is stalled, but
Oh, it's all good on my end.
okay. I'll keep
Yeah.
talking.
Okay. Okay.
um, but yeah, in theory, it's all good, but I still get some niggles here and there during certain movements. So I'm still keeping things relatively conservative, but I'm able to maintain a lot of things that I was doing prior to the accident. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Awesome. Very cool. Good for you. I mean, it's really an amazing recovery. I know I saw that video that you and Oliver collaborated on.
Mhm.
And he was saying that you sort of explored a little more than what he advised. And I know
Yeah.
when I've had patients do that for me, I'm happy when they explore a little bit, because it shows that they're able to take things into their own hands a little bit.
Mhm.
And I tell them, that's it's cool to do that. It's too much once it's too much. But
Mhm.
I'm not upset when you do that. And people have this guilt almost when they tell me that they did more than what I asked them to do. But I think it's great that people are willing to explore, because as physios, we don't want people to hurt themselves anymore. Right. So
Mhm.
sometimes we're a little bit cautious, but
Right.
if you have like really good body awareness and an understanding of pain, I think it's great to explore, especially when you're in injury, to see if you could push the boundary a little bit.
What has your injury history been like? I'm curious to know, or what your training is like, and how
Yeah.
you might bring it into your practice as a physio.
Yeah. So I have been lucky to not have too many bad injuries in my life. I've broken my left arm a couple times.
Oof.
No rehab for that. It was when I was a kid, and it didn't fuse back properly. So the carrying angle, or the angle at which when I have my palms facing towards somebody who's looking at me
Mhm.
and my elbows extended,
Mhm.
my hand is much further away from my body on my left side than it is compared to my right.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that hasn't really impacted me too much.
For the sake of brevity and everything, when we talk about this stuff, I know that we talk about how everybody's bodies are different because of their history and their background and everything like that. But what we don't really get into sometimes is what that can mean. So, for example, your arm healed differently so that you've got some asymmetries.
Hmm.
So that will affect how you do things differently than other people,
Yeah,
correct?
for sure.
Um, so maybe certain exercises would not be the best suited for you if it were if it were like a strict barbell press or something like that, it's
Yeah.
gonna look a little different, um, versus somebody else who doesn't have what you have in your arm.
Yeah.
Uh, so I was just curious to know if you've ever used that as an example for other people when they talk about, oh, I'm not doing this exercise properly because the alignment of the barbell or the traveling path is not completely 90 degrees, or it's not traveling in a straight line, or whatever it may be. I don't know if you've ever
Yeah.
um, used that example.
I actually haven't, and I probably should. What I have used as an example is that my left knee, it clicks anytime I ever go past 90 degrees in a squat,
Hmm.
without fail every time. And I feel like it's just getting louder and louder as I get a little bit older.
Hmm.
But yeah, people have a lot of uncertainty and sometimes fear when their body is clicking and making weird noises.
Hmm.
And that's something I use to show them that it's completely normal. I do this all the time, and it's not making it worse. I do it when I'm holding heavier things, and my legs are getting stronger and I feel better, and the clicking has not gone away.
Hmm.
So I use that as an example, but I think I should start using my left arm as well as an example for sure. But people also, when they're concerned about asymmetries or imbalances, I ask them if they have a dominant arm, and everyone so far has said yes.
Yes.
And that's just, I think, a good example that shows that we're born with one arm that's meant to be stronger and more competent at things.
Hmm.
The vast majority of people aren't ambidextrous, and they have an arm that can do way more than their other one.
Right.
So that's a useful little tool to show them that these sorts of things are normal. And just
Hmm.
because you have a dominant arm doesn't mean that, the weaker one is more prone to injury. Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's been a useful thing. These sorts of these analogies are really useful
Hmm.
in having these sorts of discussions with people, I find. Um, you have to frame things in a way where it resonates with them and you could relate to them. Otherwise, I feel like you're just sort of talking at them, and that's not helpful for changing any minds or helping to reassure anybody.
For sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, bone like clicking joints and whatnot. That's a really popular one.
Yeah.
Um, and one analogy that I used, which was it was really funny. I have a client who's a little older. She's a senior, and she weekly, without fail, gets a chiropractic adjustment. It's
Okay.
something she enjoys doing and gets. Um, but the moment that like her joints would pop during an exercise, she will freak out.
Yeah.
She be like, "Oh my God, is there something wrong? Did I just hurt myself?" And every time I'll ask her, "Does it hurt? And is it still there as you do more of it or after a break, whatnot?" And every time she'll say no, and I'll be like, "Why does why do you have this reaction when you pop your own joints, but
Yeah.
you have this when someone else is doing it for you on
Mm,
purpose?"
mm.
And
Yeah.
she's like, I don't know. I don't know. It's just that I guess. And after asking her this several times over the course of, I think, maybe a couple of months, at the end of it, she was like, I guess I didn't realize how much I trusted someone else to move my body
Oh,
than I did for myself.
wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of deep. Yeah, I mean, like, so many people. I think there's so much fear around exercise,
Yeah.
and there's so many inconsistencies with how we think about the body. Like, we look at these cracks as therapeutic if
Hmm.
someone is doing it for us,
Hmm.
but because exercise is so dangerous, again, air quotes, and because if you bend your back in this certain way, or if your knees go in when you squat, and
Hmm.
you hear a pop when that happens, it's just gonna reaffirm that belief that these things can be scary and dangerous when it's just part of the process.
Yeah.
Nothing to be afraid of. That's so interesting. Yeah, I think what you do is great for helping people to have some trust in their body a little bit, and to have, you know, the comfort to explore a little bit. Um, I'm sure not everything you do is always smooth and pain free, although it looks like it. Like like there's no you never show any strain on your face when you're doing these sorts of things, and I don't understand it. It looks graceful and smooth, but I'm sure, you go through like some niggles every now and then, right?
For sure, for sure. And yeah, nobody wants to. I mean, there's plenty of footage of me making funny faces, and that's what we all do when we're at the gym and we're pushing ourselves,
Yeah.
or we may be a little apprehensive about a certain movement because we've never taken it to this intensity before. There's always that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's like I said earlier, it's social media. You only see a small sliver, and it's probably the best take out of
Yeah.
hundreds.
For sure. Absolutely. People say all the time, like, "Oh, Noah, like how do you become so so smooth with how you speak on camera?" And they don't see the 9 minutes of video that I edit out where I'm just like I'm cursing in my room and stumbling over my words. It's just like it's not that I do this in one take every time. I have videos on my phone that are 10 minutes, and 9 of those minutes are me just thinking, doing nothing as I'm trying to come up with my next words. And people are like, like, how do you write your scripts? I'm like, I actually think about them, and I have video evidence of me just taking, like, looking like an idiot trying to come up with them. So it's definitely a highlight reel on social media.
Oh, 100%. Lots of practice and lots of pre-planning and rehearsal to a certain extent
Yeah.
goes into it. So yeah, it's not always perfect.
Yeah. But with that said, if anyone wants to look at your highlight reel, it is an impressive one, and it is motivating. And I hope people will look at it and want to explore a little bit more and find their own sort of journey through fitness. And as you said before, it can be a little bit boring unless you start to explore a little bit. It can make things more fun. And I think people shouldn't be afraid to be a little bit creative in the weight room like you have been. So if anyone wants to check you out, where can they find you?
So they can find me on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active. It is my name at Tasha.Louie, like the salad. And that's pretty much where I'm at. I also have a website called Bender Movement that I'm trying to be more active on as well with articles and whatnot. But yeah, Instagram's a good place to find me.
Cool. Okay. Well, I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for hopping on. It was really good to sort of hear your thought process, how you approach movement, and how you approach injury recovery. So thank you for sharing your insight, Tasha. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll chat soon.